Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, especially to our youth. Welcome to the 2022 Leadership Forum for Young Korean Americans. My name is Andrew Seol, your co-master of ceremonies, with my amazing...
Thank you, Andy. You really did this. Good morning and welcome. My name is Jin Twilly, co-emceeing with Andy today.
As you're aware, this program was produced for our future young leaders who are present here to provide you with guidance and ideas as you prepare for your bright future.
Federation of Korean American Association of Northeastern USA has worked with various government and community partners over the years with a mission statement, provided resources, programs, networking opportunities, promotions, and recognitions of local Korean American associations to build our community to be a better place to live. The members are current and past presidents of local Korean American associations of 6 states: New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Delaware.
Special thanks to our Consul General, Byung-Hwa Chung, for support on making this program possible. Thank you, Consul General.
Thank you.
To start off the program, we would like to welcome Sae-Mok Lee and Tina Sung for their opening declaration. Both are Executive Vice President for the Federation of Korean American Association of Northeastern USA.
이세목 이사장님과 티나성 수석 부회장님의 개회 선언이 있겠습니다. 자리로 모시겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 안녕하세요.
안녕하십니까. Hello everyone.
이렇게 참석해 주셔서 진심으로 감사드립니다. 감사합니다. 지금으로부터 뉴욕 대한민국 총영사관과 미 동북부 한인회 연합회 공동 주최 2022년 리더십 차세대 리더십 포럼을 시작하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
And now we're starting 2022 Leadership Forum for Young Korean Americans hosted by Consul General of the Republic of Korea in New York and Federation of Korean American Association of Northeastern USA. Thank you so much and enjoy.
All right, everyone, please rise from your seats.
국민일에 갖겠습니다. 모두 자리에서 일어나 주십시오.
Everyone, please salute to the national flags.
국기에 대한 경례. 바로
We're going to have a moment of silence for our fallen heroes who made the ultimate sacrifice for our democracy and freedom.
다음은 순국 선열 및 호국 영령에 대한 묵념이 있겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Please remain standing for both national anthems to be presented by Edelweiss Ensemble. Please come up.
에델바이스 앙상블 학생들의 양국가 제창이 있겠습니다. 학생들 올라주십시오.
By the long curling line, so bad.
I would like to ask Ambassador Byung-Hwa Chung, Consul General of Republic of Korea for New York, up to the podium for his welcoming remarks.
주 뉴욕 대한민국 청영사관의 정병화 대사님의 환영사가 있겠습니다.
Wow, there are so many prominent Korean American young leaders this morning. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. My special thanks also go to today's esteemed speakers for sharing their insights and wisdom with all young leaders. As many of you know, in partnership with the Federation of Korean American Associations of Northeastern USA, we have been hosting this Leadership Forum for young leaders since 2020. I really appreciate the efforts and efforts of President Lee Ju-hyang and her team for preparing this forum. We have a very simple goals for this forum. We genuinely want to enable young Korean Americans to succeed. So consider today as a platform for you to connect, network, and find support among your peers in pursuing your own future. This year's forum is more meaningful as it also marks the 140th year of diplomatic ties between Korea and the United States. While our two countries have always enjoyed a close friendship, our alliance has never been stronger. We owe much to Korean Americans as they have been an essential part in elevating our bilateral ties to a more comprehensive, mature relationship. And therein lies the point I want to make today. First, be proud of yourselves as Korean Americans. Take pride in the great strides the Korean American community has made. Many remarkable Korean Americans have made great strides politically, culturally, and economically. Today's prominent speakers are some examples of them. As a result, the community has gained a greater presence and a stronger voice in America. Also, as young leaders, you have woven yourselves into the fabric of American society, further diversifying and enriching it. You have every reason to be proud of being a Korean American. Next, be the pillars of community's continued prosperity. Many of you are a product of hard work, persistence, and the dreams of the first generation. They lay the foundation of this community. Now it's your turn to build upon it. I have no doubt that you will be successful, and your success will also contribute to the shared prosperity, not just of your community, but also of Korea. When that happens, your contributions will be your legacy for future generations. Finally, through today, I hope you will continue your journey discovering where your talents lie, pursuing them, and writing your own success stories to lead your community's future. I wish you the best luck in your future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please give a warm welcome to the President of the Federation of Korean American Association of Northeastern USA, Judy Yu, for her welcoming remarks. 미 동북부 한인회 연합회 이주영 회장님의 환영사가 있겠습니다.
안녕하세요. Hello everyone, my name is Judy Yu. I'm the president of Federation of Korean American Associations of Northeastern USA. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for participating 2022 Leadership Forum for Korean American young leaders. Somebody told me, "Oh, do your hair," and then I was touching my hair. This year, this is our third year having forum, and it has been great success. And this year we have amazing speakers, and then I know you guys will enjoy. You will have a chance to hear their experience, and then success tool, and then their own story. So hopefully everyone have, throughout this forum, have a motivation and some positive energy that you are seeking to have for your future, dream and goals. 우리 미동국부 한인회가 지난 3년간 우리 주니옥 대한민국 총영상관과 우리 커뮤니티, 우리 차세대를 위해서 공동 개최하는 이 차세대 포럼을 통해서 많은 좋은 열매가 맺히고 있습니다. 먼저 우리 정병화 대사님께 깊은 감사의 말씀을 드리고 또 총영사관 관계자 여러분들께 협력의 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 오늘 이 포럼을 통해서 우리 차세대들이 앞으로 비전에 대해서 또 앞으로 향후 계획에 대해서 도전을 받고 또 아름다운 우리 한인 커뮤니티가 우리 동북부 뉴욕, 뉴저지, 펜실베니아, 델라웨어, 커네티컷, 매사추세츠에서 아름다운 커뮤니티가 계속 발전되기를 소망합니다. 여러분들 즐거운 시간 되십시오. Everybody please enjoy the forum. Thank you so much.
Thank you, President Yu. All right, next on the program, we have congratulatory remarks from our local politician. First, I would like to welcome Ellen Park from the New Jersey 37 Legislative Assembly. She's actually the first Korean woman elected to the New Jersey legislature. Ellen?
네, 축사로 앨런 박 뉴저지 주 하원 의원님의 축사가 있겠습니다.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming here today. This is pretty amazing. I'm so delighted that everybody's, here in the interest of Korean Americans in here in the U.S. And I think the term Korean Americans is pretty amazing because if you look at Joseph film, you realize I came here in the 70s. We were just Koreans then, and now we're Korean Americans, right? So I just want to say that. Really, let's keep the momentum going, and we need to really invest in our future, and that's why you guys are here. But I'm going to give a little speech. So I just want to give congratulatory remarks. It's really amazing about this forum and this young leaders group, and so I want to thank and congratulate Judy Yu and the Consulate General of the Republic of Korea in New York. I know that Korean American community is nearly 2 million strong, 200,000 of whom are living right here in Bergen County right now. In New Jersey. And in its inception, the Federation of Korean American Association of Northeastern USA has worked tirelessly to promote strong bonds and sense of common identity ranging from Boston and Philadelphia to my home in Bergen County. It is an essential organization for a rapidly growing population. The Federation's deep relationships and partnerships with other organizations and its supports of Korean community has a built-in foundation upon which those who follow can stand, build, expand the support and influence of Korean Americans in American society. During this forum, I'm sure you'll have a chance to meet many extraordinary Korean Americans who represent a variety of career paths and professional choices. I encourage everyone to ask questions. Don't be shy. We are all here to, help you in your growth. My office, I don't know if you know, this is actually, Fort Lee is one of my towns. I'm responsible for 13 towns in District 37, and Fort Lee happens to be one of them. And if you ever have questions in politics, please reach out to my office, and we will gladly help assist and help you with any questions and endeavors you might have in political leadership sometime in the future. So thank you again.
Thank you.
I actually have some resolutions for the Council General and Judy. Okay, this one. Yeah.
This is a very special resolution. It's actually presented by the State and General Assembly of New Jersey. So,
I actually have two, one for each. Thank you. For all your hard work.
thank you. 수고 많으십니다. Thank you. Next, I would like to welcome Kimberly Fierro. She's the Connecticut State Representative. She represents Greenwich, Connecticut, which is one of the district represents. She's also first Korean, and especially, as you can see, she injured her back, but she made every effort because she is fully aware this is a very special event, so she's here for us today. So let's give her a big round of applause.
Thank you. 다음에 축사로는 송민경 커네리컷 주 하원 의원님의 축사 읽겠습니다.
네, 안녕하세요. 제 이름은 송민경입니다. My name is Kimberly Fiorello, and I'm also the first Korean American elected to serve in the legislature in Connecticut, the Constitution state. And the ambassador mentioned something. This is a very special year. It's the 140th anniversary of a connection between Korea and the United States. And I just wanted to remark on three thoughts on that. It's enlightened ideas, it's human flourishing, and it's prayers. We are all beneficiaries of what happened 140 years ago. If you think about it, Korea was still the Joseon dynasty, and America was a brand new country. It was only 106 years old. It had just made itself, willed itself into existence on the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It just had a civil war to prove that all men are created equal. And then it looked out into the world, and it knocked on the door of the Joseon dynasty. And the Joseon dynasty opened its door and made a treaty. And that treaty in 1882 was called the Treaty of Peace, Amity, Commerce, and Navigation. And we are all beneficiaries of that. And the connection between Korea and the United States is so strong. And we know that Korea embraced these enlightened ideas of individual liberty, because South Korea today is an example of a country that respects individual liberty and rule of law, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. And there's human flourishing happening in South Korea, but not in North Korea. Unfortunately, our peninsula is an example of the two diametric ideas of a country that embraces freedom and a country that embraces force. And then there's prayers. When we had that union in 1882, it allowed Christian missionaries into the Korean peninsula. And today, many of us are Christians. And we know in the North, there is no religious freedom. And so I urge us to continue to pray for our country, the United States, pray for North Korea, that those people will one day in our lifetime see an end to their suffering. But lastly, you are all exemplars as Korean Americans. In America, as Koreans, you are exemplars of a work ethic, family values. You shine a light in the American community of what people can accomplish from nothing. And that's a remarkable thing, and don't ever lose that pride in being hardworking, family-oriented people. And also, we are examples as Americans to our brothers and sisters in Korea. We should always be proud to be people of freedom. We are free people, we love free markets, and we want rule of law. The ideas that America stands for, we should always be preaching that to our brothers and sisters in Korea, because one day we're going to have to, hopefully, God willing, have a reunion with our brothers and sisters in North Korea. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, Annie. And I'm delighted my husband and my 3 daughters are here also. And I appreciate every opportunity to get together as Korean Americans. So we have enlightened ideas from the land of the free, home of the brave. We have human flourishing, embracing capitalism, and we have Christianity and prayers, which makes us people who recognize that there's a greater power. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kimberly, for your wonderful speech. Please take care. You okay? Yeah. Okay, next we're going to have congratulatory remarks from politicians who are not able to join us today. Obviously, they will have loved to have been here and part of the program, but unfortunately, due to the conflict of schedule, they were not able to be here today. So in order, it will be Andy Kim, Patty Kim, David O, Linda Lee, Charles Jun. He's the president of the Korean American Association Great in New York, and then Ron Kim.
2022년 차세대 리더십 포럼을 위하여 축사 동영상을 보내주신 앤디 킴 미 연방 하원의원, 패리 킴 펜실베니아 주 하원의원, 데이비드 오 필라델피아 광역시의원, 린다 리 뉴욕시의원, 찰스 윤 뉴욕 한인회장, 그리고 론 킴 뉴욕 주 하의원님께 감사를 드립니다. 자, 조금 이따 시청하시도록 하시겠습니다.
Hi everyone, I'm Congressman Andy Kim, and I want to thank the Federation of Korean American Associations, Northeastern USA, to President Judy Yu, I've known for so many years, and for the Consulate General for hosting this event again. Thank you so much for giving me a chance to speak, to be able to continue to show my appreciation for what you're doing. Right now, more than ever, we want to make sure that we're cultivating the kind of leadership that we need in our country, especially within the Korean American community and especially with our youth. We have so much that we need to continue to push forward on to lift those voices up. I say that as the only Asian American ever elected to federal office from the state of New Jersey. And I'm currently the youngest Asian American elected to federal office in the entire country. These are the types of things that I see on a daily basis. Not just that we need more representation when it comes to the diversity, which we certainly do, but the diversity not just in ethnicity and heritage and race, but also in terms of age. And I just, for all the young Korean Americans, Asian Americans that are participating in this, I just want to say thank you for stepping up, for your engagement in these organizations and these efforts. That's how we start. That's how we start to build up, for you to understand that you have a seat at the table, that you have a voice in the room that is every bit as much substance and importance as anybody else. And I'm really excited to see what you all do. I'm really excited to see what this new generation of leadership is going to do for our community and for our country. Because look, there's so many challenges that we face, huge problems that we as a country, we as a generation across the board are experiencing right now. And we need engagement. That's the big question right now, is this dividing line between those that are engaged and those that are not. Our future will be shaped by those that are engaged, and I hope that that is a place where we can focus in on and be able to drive outcomes towards and be able to engage. So again, congratulations for all that you've accomplished, but we have a long way to go. And I look forward to working alongside all of you for many years to come, hopefully. And I just want to say thank you for being engaged, and thank you for being such a great partner through this all. And with that, I'll let you get back to it. Take care, everyone.
Hi everyone, my name is Patty Kim. I am the state representative for the 103rd District here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I am so sorry I couldn't join you in person, but I'm incredibly excited for you. I've seen the list of speakers and I know that they are incredible and their experience will be so helpful and that they will inspire you as you choose your path forward. I also know that these types of events take an incredible amount of work and hours and time. And so I just want to thank the host. I want to thank the Consulate General of the Republic of Korea in New York. And I also want to thank the Federation of Korean American Associations of Northeastern USA, specifically Judy Yu, for putting this together and for inviting me to say a couple of words. I am pretty confident that as you hear the experience of the speakers, that something will click, because when you listen to someone who you can relate to and who has broken barriers ahead of you, that something will click in your head, and maybe not now, but maybe later, and say, you know what, this is something that I want to do, or this is the passion that I want to choose to do in the future. So I'm incredibly excited for you. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to hearing your story as you move forward and making us proud as the next generation for Korean Americans. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Councilman David O, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the Leadership Forum for Young Korean Americans. I thank both the Consulate General of the Republic of Korea in New York and the Federation of Korean American Associations of Northeastern USA for hosting this special event for the past 3 years. I hope this forum will provide you with valuable insights into how you can be the very best person you can be. During this forum, you will have a unique opportunity to meet many talented Korean Americans who represent a variety of different professional fields and are also leaders in advancing the overall Korean American community and beyond. I hope you'll be able to have an enriching experience that will help you develop and grow as leaders in your chosen careers. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Linda Lee, City Council member for the 23rd District in Queens, and I just wanted to say congratulations to President Judy Yu as well as the rest of the board of the Federation of Korean American Associations of Northeastern USA for your 3rd annual Young Leaders Forum. And having been there in the past couple of years, I know that it's such a great event for our youth to be able to listen to stories from all different sectors and industry leaders that are Korean American, and to celebrate all the accomplishments we've made, and also to give the youth and all of you who are there a sense of what is possible and people who are constantly breaking glass ceilings all the time in our community. And I'm proud to say that myself, as well as my colleague Councilwoman Julie Wan, are the first Korean Americans in the New York City Council. And we may be the first, but we do not want to be the last. And hopefully there will be many more of you that are thinking about serving in government or public service. And I really encourage you guys to reach out to us, as well as those folks in the room with you right now, to really grow and learn and really think about this as a career and a possibility for all of you as well. So I just wanted to say congratulations again. I know some of the speakers who will be speaking to all of you today, and they're all amazing, amazing leaders in our community. And so I'm just so sorry that I could not be there in person. There's a few events in my district happening at the same time, but I wish you all well, and hopefully I will see all of you soon.
Hello, everyone. My name is Charles Yoon. I am the president of the Korean American Association of Greater New York, also known as CAANE. CAANE has been serving the Korean American community for the past 62 years. During the early days of CAANE's work was focused on helping the first generation of Korean American immigrants settle in the United States. Now, after 62 years, the Korean American community is now diverse in terms of generations. We have 1.5 and second and even third generation of Korean Americans that make up our community. Accordingly, we have to also expand our programs, and we also need leaders from the different generations, which is why the conference that is being put on today by President Lee Ju-hyun, by the Federation, and sponsored by the Korean Consulate is so vitally important. I thank all of you who are here today participating in this conference. I wish you a productive conference. I wish for more Korean American leaders to emerge to lead our community into the future. Thank you very much.
Hello, this is Assembly Member Ron Kim. Really wanted to be in person with you this year for this amazing youth summit for Korean Americans. Unfortunately, I caught COVID again, and I have to take care of myself for a few days. But I do want to send my warm greetings and acknowledgement and gratitude for President Judy Yu, the President of the Federation of Korean American Associations of Northeastern USA, for continuing this amazing summit to help young Korean American leaders figure out what they want to do in their careers and find their passions. I also want to thank Ambassador Byung-Hwa Chung for sponsoring and for being part of this event, and for all the wonderful panelists and community leaders who are participating in this event. Thank you so much. Again, I wish I could be there in person to see my friends and colleagues, but you're in good hands. We have council members, Congress members, and community leaders who have shaped local, state, and national policies that impact not just Koreans, but all Americans in this country. So I think it's a great privilege and honor that young Korean Americans have the opportunity to network in forums like this. I never had anything like this when I was growing up. I never had anyone that looked like me or anyone else of our background in public office or any positions of power in this country. But now you have a pipeline of leaders who can help you to get to the next level of public service. And not just because you want to have a fancy title or you want to be someone famous or powerful, but it's because you want to do something and have ownership of this country moving forward. As you can see, there's many things that we are failing in this country, that we're not meeting the moment, whether it's societal, economic, health. There's so many things that government is failing to meet. In fact, we're so good at just signing contracts and giving out endless money to nonprofits and contractors, but there hasn't been anything in our generation, the last many decades, that we've done to solve the systemic and structural problems that are causing the intergenerational poverty and the suffering behind our communities. And it's up to us. It's your turn, and it's up to us to work with the next generation to figure out these deep-seated problems. And I hope that you can have some meaningful conversations and tough questions for policymakers and nonprofit and community leaders, so we can hold each other accountable moving forward. Thank you so much for your time. And if you have anything, please reach out to me on my social media or my email at info@ronkim.com. Thank you so much.
So as you heard from Ron, he would have loved to have joined us and be part of this program, but because of his health situation, he couldn't be here. So he sent someone from his office, Im Ji-yoon, to provide a citation to our President Judy Yu.
론 킴 뉴욕주 하원의원께서 준비하신 정병화 대사님과 이주영 회장님의 사이테이션을 보좌관님 올라와 주셔야 돼요. 임지윤 보좌관님께서 전달하시겠습니다.
Let's give him a big round of applause. Congratulations, Ambassador and President.
축하드립니다.
All right, next on the program is a special speech. He's an award-winning lawyer who turned filmmaker, and he's very passionate about to share of his diasporic narrative. And he recently completed his second documentary called Chosun. I'd like to welcome Joseph Jun up to the stage.
전후석 다큐멘터리 영화 감독님의 Korean Diaspora 특별 강연이 있겠습니다.
That was a long introduction, wasn't it? Right? Let's make it fun now, okay? I took a red-eye flight to New Jersey this morning from LA. So I flew 6 hours just to be here for my 10 minutes of presentation with you guys. So I would just ask for 10 minutes of your engagement. And I promise you I'll make it thought-provoking and engaging. So please bear with me, okay? Diaspora is the future is the topic of my presentation. I have my book that I published last year that I'm gonna give out for free. If anyone can volunteer and let me know if you understand the term diaspora. I'll take volunteers. It's not a tricky question. If you went to church, you probably have a better idea. What does diaspora mean? Any volunteers? Not a single student? No one wants my book? Okay, diaspora. If there's one takeaway from this conference, from my presentation, it's the term diaspora. And diaspora stands for the people, those people who live outside of their homeland, right? So who goes to church here? Okay, if you go to church, you probably read the Bible, where the Bible consists of, the story is of Jewish diaspora, right? Can you guys think of someone who's a member of the Korean diaspora? Probably all of us, right? All of us, right? So, about a year ago, right? 1 year ago, there's a group of Koreans who live in Russia and Central Asia, like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and so forth. They had a Zoom conference, right? During the pandemic a year ago. And one of the scholars, by the name of Valery Khan, asked this question. He's a third generation Korean Uzbek, right? He's a Korean who's been living in Uzbekistan for all his life. And he asked this question: will the Korean diaspora eventually disappear? Have you guys ever thought of this? Will we eventually disappear? Maybe not us, because we're hosting a conference like this, and we gather and we talk about identity, leadership, and our role in this great country of America. But do you ever fear or think about maybe our future generation, our children's children's children? Do you think maybe at some point, inevitably, they will lose their language completely, culture completely, identity completely, their collective memory of history completely? He asked that question, right? And he gave a talk on it for 30 minutes, but he didn't answer that question. So I raised my hand and asked him the same question. Professor Valery Khan, do you think us Korean diaspora will eventually disappear? And guess what, guys? There was a 30 seconds of pause, silence, right? At first, I thought the computer was froze, right? But I saw him contemplating, agonizing, really thinking hard about this question. And then he looked up finally, and he looked at the camera on his laptop and said, I think we might eventually disappear, right? Whether or not that statement becomes true, it made me think a lot. It made me think about what are some of the values, what are some of the characteristics that we Korean Americans have that is worth preserving, that is worth remembering. I want you guys to think about that. I'm going to talk about myself a little bit, okay? That's me. I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And as you can see, I'm that little boy. I was cuter back then, right? But I'm going to talk about identity. And I'm going to talk about 3 different stages, my own identity formation, okay? So, being Korean, because I was born in America, but I went to Korea when I was 3, right? And that's me again. A little Korean elementary student. If you look at that photo carefully, if you were to blur my face, and my mom came to school to find me, she probably wouldn't, right? What does that mean? It means that when I was growing up in Korea, ironically, I never questioned my Korean identity. It's a paradox, right? It's an oxymoron. I never questioned my Korean identity when I was in Korea. Why? Because I was a part of the majority, right? If you're part of the majority, you don't question your identity. There's this philosopher that I really respect. Her name is Kang Nam-soon, Professor Kang Nam-soon. She said, identity is a topic for minorities. Because if you're part of the majority, you don't think about your identity. You don't need to, because you have this ownership, right? This is the list of countries based on their diversity level in the world. So number 1 is the most diverse, 159 is the least diverse. South Korea ranks bottom, second to the bottom. There's only one country below us. Where is it? North Korea, right? So it is true that Korea, geographically, when it comes to ethnic cultural diversity level, we're actually one of the most homogeneous countries, right? What does that mean again? You're part of the majority, you don't question your Korean identity. But things became really interesting when I came back to the States when I was 18. I became a minority. How many of you guys were born in Korea but came to the US at a later age? A few of you, yeah? You guys all remember the point when you first came back and realized, holy crap, excuse me, I'm no longer a majority. I feel self-conscious. Maybe my existence is questioned. Maybe I'm no longer a legitimate American because of where I come from or because of my ethnic background, right? It shapes you, it transforms your worldview because you're no longer part of the majority, right? And me too, I came to this US and I started trying to find myself between these countries. Am I American? Am I Korean? Maybe some of you guys struggle with this, right? Identity crisis. But then I learned about 4.29. Earlier this year, it was 30-year anniversary of 4.29, LA riots. How many of you guys know something about LA riots? Some of you. We're going to go through a quick history lesson. It says 1991, March 3rd. Oops, it's okay. What's happening in the footage? I think there's a freeze. Let's go back again. What's happening in the freeze, guys, or in the footage, guys? An African-American man by the name of Rodney King was almost beaten to death by 16 cops surrounding him, right? And this happened 31 years ago. When the footage was captured by a bystander, and he was so shocked at what he was seeing, he sent it to all the major outlets, news outlets, the next day. And the discourse began on, wow, look at this. This is ridiculous. Look at the systemic racism. Look at the white, supremacy. Look at the police brutality. This is unforgivable. This is happening before our eyes, right? This is the reality of America. So all these ethnic groups, African Americans and other activists, rose up in anger, and they wanted to protest. They wanted to bring the country in a better direction. And while that conversation was being had, something else happened, right? Less than 2 weeks.
15-year-old Latasha Harlins was shot and killed by store owner Sue Jadu. Du claimed Harlins was stealing a bottle of orange juice when she confronted the teenager. The store security cameras captured the incident on videotape as Harlins repeatedly hits Du, who takes a gun from under the counter. Du claims she accidentally pulled the trigger, killing the teenager. Members of the black community charged the shooting was racially motivated.
After Rodney King's beating, only less than 2 weeks later, Latasha Harlins, a black teenage girl, walks into a Korean-owned store. She picks up a bottle of orange juice and puts behind her backpack. And the Korean merchant owner thought she's going to steal, so they got into a scuffling. Are you trying to steal? She's like, no, I'm not. But then she picked up a gun and shot the girl, and she died on the spot. Right? Later, the police found that the girl had $2 in her pocket, which was enough to pay for the orange juice. Whatever the truth is, Latasha Harlins and Du Sunja, this incident, all the major media, US media, picked up on this incident, and they started playing this video over and over for the next weeks and months, right? Guess what happens? LA Times and all the major news media started highlighting and amplifying the tension between the Koreans and the blacks in LA. And little by little, the Rodney King beating incident was forgotten, and 두순자 사건, the incident, was highlighted, right? A year passes by, and there's a jury trial on the 4 cops that beat Rodney King. Was it innocent or guilty? It was innocent, and this is what happens after.
Let's start rolling some of the videotape. We were in an area right outside of Koreatown. There are a lot of Korean businesses in that area, and here we go. Once again, we got there just as this market was starting to be looted. Look at these people pouring out of the shoe store. You gotta wonder what's going on in these people's minds. You wonder what's going on inside these stores? Well, we took some shots here.
Get out! This is America! Get out!
Illegal, they don't care, but I'll tell you what happened moments later. The Korean merchants and store owners who own that shopping complex, 3 of them were holding guns and they just started firing. It actually pulled out loaded guns, but their bullets flying all over.
Right after the innocent verdict, for 72 hours, Koreatown in Los Angeles was burned down. Over 2,500 Korean merchant stores and liquor store, laundry store, they were all burned down. All the police force went to Beverly Hills, Westwood, and all the expensive neighborhood and set up barricades so the rioters wouldn't advance. But they watched from afar as the Koreatown was burning down, right? That was the reality of America. The next clip I'm going to show you, this is something that I filmed when I was in college, learning about LA riots, 4.29. And I'm gonna show you a very angry 할아버지, okay? And he's gonna drop a lot of F-bombs. Don't be offended by that. Just see the anger and the sense of Han that he has for younger generation Korean Americans. And as he's highlighting the importance of 4.29, LA riots, as you guys define and redefine your Korean American identity.
You, 4.29 represent for the first time that the children of 4.29 are the only one who paid the help. You are the first and last line of defense for your parents. As children of Mama Rosa Parks was the first and last line of defense for blacks in the South. Remember that. That's the only lesson I want to give you. You have to define your destiny in your own terms. You know, when you had a 30,000 demonstrations in America.
This is peace rally after the riots. Koreans took to the streets and they sang Arirang.
We want justice! We want peace! We want peace! We want justice! We want justice! We want peace!
It's the largest fucking demonstrations in America. They're carried out by your parents who don't speak a fucking English. And you guys pretended it. That's when I moved the vote again. I became a Korean American.
As I was filming that, I told you about my identity struggle, trying to find myself between Korea and America. I felt like learning about 4.29 and LA riots, I felt like I became Korean American. The moment he said I became Korean American after 4.29, I felt like I can contribute to the formation and the evolution of the Korean American identity, right? So for me, it was learning about 4.29 that defined my Korean American experience. And K.W. Lee says, before 4.29, and as Ellen Park representative said, before 4.29, we were Korean immigrants, but after 4.29, we became Korean Americans, right? So I thought that was it. This is me 15 years ago, leading a conference in my school, thinking that I've reached my destination when it comes to identity search, but there's more. And this is where the concept diaspora comes in. Please give me 3 more minutes. This is China. I went to China right after college, and I met my Korean ethnic Chinese friends. This is my friend Ilsu, and he said, "Hey, Joseph," and I'm like, "What's up?" And he says, "Have you heard of this fruit called apple pear, 사과배?" I said, what is it? And he's like, oh, it's genetically engineered food only produced in our region. I said, oh, that's cool. And he says, we Korean ethnic Chinese people, we have traditionally and historically compared ourselves, our existence, to this fruit. And I said, why? And he says, because we're neither fully pear nor fully apple. We're neither fully Chinese, neither fully Korean. And when he told me that, I'm like, okay, I wasn't the only one going through this identity crisis. It wasn't just my Korean American friends who went through identity crisis. They too went through identity crisis. I met a lot of North Korean defectors working at a North Korean rescue mission, and they told me too that, hey Joseph, I feel like I'm neither fully South Korean nor North Korean. When I was backpacking in Germany, I ran into Korean German people and they told me the same thing. We're neither fully Germans nor fully Koreans. And also Brazilians, Korean Brazilians in Sao Paulo, Korean South Africans, Koreans in the Middle East, Korean Russians, and Korean Cubans. This is how I became a filmmaker. I've always had encounters and meetings with all these Koreans from different parts of the world. 7 years ago, I was practicing attorney. I went to Cuba and I hopped into a taxi. I went there to have fun, backpacking, right? And the taxi driver was fourth generation Korean Cubans who told me that their grandparents were sold as slaves 100 years ago. And I'm like, holy crap, if there's God, God's telling me a sign to tell a story about them, right? That's how I made my first film about Korean Cubans. As I was making a documentary on Korean Cubans, I started thinking about this larger concept of Korean diaspora, meaning not only was I Korean American, but I'm a part of the larger Korean diaspora. And this really expanded my notion of what I can become, what kind of communities I can be involved with, what kind of people that can come into my own world, right? And so I want you guys to really think about that. You're, of course, not only Korean and Korean American, a member of AAPI and a member of the larger Americans, but you're also part of the Korean diaspora. There are 8 million Koreans living outside of Korea, and they all have their own diasporic journey and identity, and it's so interesting. Almost finally, I think diasporic identity is what I call. It's a term I coined. And these are all the characteristics that you guys have. The in-betweenness, right? The duality, the hybridity, diversity. And most of all, you guys have hospitality because you guys are minorities, right? You guys are someone who's standing at the border, right? You guys have this dual identity, and that allows you to empathize with people of other ethnic minority as well, right? And I think that gives you the sense of hospitality that you can practice, perhaps better than those who only have one fixated identity. So
why don't we start
at large?
The idea of diaspora?
So the heart of diaspora is pain. The idea that you can't live in your ancestral homeland, that you can't be where you want to be, and perhaps you can't practice a religion or a culture in the way that you otherwise would. But what results from the pain is innovation. The idea that you can change some of the traditions and adapt them and modernize them and make them relevant wherever you are.
From now on, everyone you see on the screen is Korean, okay?
Para mí yo soy coreano, yo no soy cubano. Para mí yo soy coreano. Y me muero siendo coreano. ¿Comprende? Porque la única patria que reconoció mi padre y mi madre.
나한테 한국어 좋지 않아요. 그렇지만 매일 한국어 공부하고 있어요. 한국 깨끗한 사람입니다. 알아요. 그렇지만 그냥 한국 사람입니다.
Could you read the letter from your grandfather?
Ya. La patria. Patria es el legado de abnegación de nuestros antecesores y la ofrenda de nuestros mártires. Es la inspiración de los que sueñan un mañana mejor y un futuro de hermandad. Su concepto va más allá de las fronteras geográficas. No se limita a los que nacen en un lugar determinado. ni se sujeta a las normas políticas de un nacionalismo egoísta. El sentimiento patriótico debe fundirles a la esperanza y al clamor de los desposeídos, de los explotados que aspiran y luchan por un mundo mejor. La patria es la dignidad y el honor de los que saben merecerla.
In closing, the Jewish rabbi that I interviewed for my first film said, all members of diaspora is born out of pain. The pain of your parents or grandparents having to leave their homeland, having to readjust into a new land, and this pain of having to create a new identity for their kids, right? But what that pain begets, what that pain gives birth to is this sense of innovation, this creative identity that you guys can merge with your homeland's culture and your local culture, right? So be mindful of that, be empowered by that idea, and with the interest of time, I have to end it here. I have more videos that I wanted to share, but hopefully I can meet you other time and talk more about this. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Joseph, for your powerful speech. I think it resonated with a lot of people who are here today. So, just going back slightly to our program, I'd like to welcome Julie Won up to the stage. She's the New York City Council member representing the 26th District, which is Long Island City, Woodside, Astoria, and Sunnyside. Welcome, Julie.
줄리 원 뉴욕 시의원님의 축사가 있겠습니다.
Good morning. Actually, it's good afternoon now. Good afternoon. Let me hear it. Good afternoon. I want to see that you're awake back there. Good afternoon. It's so good to meet you. My name is Julie Won, and I'm a council member representing Long Island City, Sunnyside, Woodside, and Astoria in New York City, in Queens, the best borough. So it's so good to see you, and thank you so much to the documentarist who just spoke before me for sharing such deep reflection with all of us. When I think back as one of the first Korean American elected officials for the New York City Council, along with Councilmember Linda Lee, which you saw in the earlier video, as well as our first Korean American woman to represent Queens, former board president Sharon Lee, it is so incredibly moving for me to see the Korean diaspora all over the world. This past week, I just returned from Korea, where we had an official meeting of overseas Koreans, where I met the first Korean-British elected official from London. I met a senior advisor to the Argentinian president, who is of Korean descent. I met a Korean-New Zealand, I think she called herself a Korean Kiwi, who is a part of the New Zealand parliament. We, as you just heard, are children of war. We are children of pain who have come to this country, or whichever country that our ancestors have come to, and have been the fruits of their labor, the fruits of their forgotten mother tongue, the fruits of their families left behind, and their friends. If you asked me a year ago, Julie, why are you leaving your job at IBM, which you have been for about 10 years, making good money, which is exactly what our parents ask us to do, right? 공부 열심히 해서 돈 잘 벌고 성공해서 엄마 아빠한테 잘해줘, you know? So that's exactly what I wanted to do. All I wanted to do was to be successful so I could provide for my family, especially for my parents. And if you asked me a year ago what led me to run, was COVID-19. When everything shut down, a lot like you, my parents were working at small businesses, at a nail salon, in other small businesses like delis, and I saw my friends whose parents were struggling at their setakso, and everything shut down. When everything shut down and my parents couldn't work anymore, I was their safety net. I had to provide to make sure that they had their living expenses covered, their rent, everything in between, and I had no problem doing that. I gave up my own apartment so I could pay for my parents. I moved in with my friend so that I could save money. And as I was just serving, as I was working full-time and serving in my community, As someone who grew up on public school free lunch, the only image that I could see over and over again when I saw the news of how small businesses have shut down, children cannot go to school, and schools have been shut down, and kids are going to go hungry, was an image of me and my brother walking home from school, where my older brother would pick me up and we would walk back, and we were only allowed to make one stop at the nail salon that my mom was working at. I would stop at the store, I would knock on the window, and I would wave at my mom and be like, "Oh, mama." And then my brother and I would wave at her. She would wave right back. And I would walk to the library where that was my childcare. And I remember every single day how happy my mom was to see us, no matter what she was doing. But one day, my mom was not there at her desk at the nail salon. And I looked up at my older brother when we were waving and she wasn't sitting there. My brother started crying. And at 8 years old, I didn't know why he was crying, so I opened the door because I thought my mom got kidnapped, and I was like, "엄마, 어디 계세요?" And in the back of the room, she stood up, she was on the floor, and she said, "걱정하지 마, 엄마 일하고 있어." And she was just at a pedicure chair washing someone else's feet. And when I came out, my brother didn't say a word, he just cried, and he walked me straight to the library again. And looking back to that image, now I know that my mother, who was a professor, had now become a nail salon worker, washing a white woman's feet so that I could have a better future than she had imagined for herself in Korea. And now I stand before you as one of the first Korean American council members in New York City. It has been 119 years since Korean Americans have immigrated to this country. It took us this long to find representation in a city where we have been a population of. This is the fruit of our parents, our grandparents, our uncles, our aunts, our neighbors. This is what we're talking about when we talk about what they have come to this country for. And when we talk about leadership as Korean Americans, it does not mean that you have to be in politics. It does not mean you have to be a doctor. It does not mean you have to be a lawyer. Leadership comes in all forms, no matter how old you are, no matter how young you are. You can go into politics, you can work in the government, you can work in the medical field, you could work in technology, you could work in marketing, you could work in finance. The opportunities are limitless in this country. Because your parents have chosen, because your grandparents have chosen to sacrifice their livelihood in their home countries to come here for you. So I hope that every minute that you have today to learn from the forums, to speak to all of the respected people who are in this room to invest in you, that you take advantage of it. And make sure you turn around to the people sitting at your table and introduce yourself, say hello, and remember their names, get their contacts, and know that these are your new community members. So that 5 years from now, 8 years from now, when you all have graduated from high school or college or after college, that you know that you're part of something greater than your own friend groups, but you're part of the Korean diaspora that is global, that is countrywide, that is in every part of this world that you can even imagine. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of the Korean leaders of the future, and it is great to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie, for that touching speech. Appreciate it. We'd like to welcome back our president, Judy Yu, back to the stage.
여러분 죄송합니다. 너무 지금 한 15분 늦어졌는데 그래도 간단히 I'm going to introduce some of the guests we have here today. 우리 한번 다시 우리 메인 테이블 우리 정병화 대사님 다시 한번 인사드리겠습니다. 네, 그리고 우리 엘렌 파크 뉴저지 주하원 의원님. And then 우리 줄리 원 뉴욕 시의원님 감사합니다. 우리 킴벌리 피오렐로 커네티컷 주하원 의원님. 그리고 우리 저희 미동구 한인연합회 이사장님이십니다. 우리 이세목 이사장님. 그리고 우리 잠깐 내려갈게요. 우리 티나성 우리 수석 부회장님이시고 필라델피아 평통 한인 회장님이시기도 합니다. 그리고 우리 커뮤니티 한인 커뮤니티 아주 great. We have great news. I don't know if you guys know Philip Jason Memorial Foundation from Philadelphia. We have Georgie Choi, the president of Philip Jason. They just received 5.25 million grant from Montgomery County in Pennsylvania. So they've been done so much nice work for last 30, 40 years, and then I think it got paid off. George, okay, give him a round of applause. And then also Tim Ha, Pastor Tim Ha, he's a great supporter for our Korean community. He's going to pray for us later. And then we have amazing speaker. This is the main program today, but it's kind of a delay. Sharon Lee, welcome Sharon Lee. She was a moderator last year, and then she came back. Thank you so much. And Dr. David Park. She's going to introduce more about just name, Dr. David Park, and then Joseph John, thank you, and then Sihan, thank you, and then 경복 이은, they are all here waiting, and also 우리 그 재미한국학교 동북부 협의회 회장님께서 강성방 회장님께서 오셨습니다. 잠깐 일어나 주시죠. 내년에는 동북부 한국학교가 지금 몇 개죠? 한 170? 70 한국 학교 학생들이 다 올 것 같아요, 내년에는. So we have to extend our program. 그리고 우리 이정혜 회장님, 뉴욕 교사협의회 회장님, 그리고 이경애 재미한국학교 부회장님, 그리고 우리 최재복 나눔센터 이사장님 감사드립니다. 그리고 테이블 뚜리에 우리 한인 회장님들께서 오셨어요. 우리 오기정 커네디컷 한인 회장님 감사합니다. He drove many hours. 우리 황종호 폴리 한인 회장님, 그리고 우리 오대석 펠팍 한인 회장님, 그리고 우리 손한익 우리 전 뉴저지 한인 회장님, 그리고 박윤모 웨스체스터 한인 회장님, 그리고 우리 폴 킴 팔리사데스 파크 시의원님이십니다. 우리 시의원님의 활동을 기대해 주셔도 되겠습니다. 그리고 우리 뒤에 KCS 김명미 회장님 뒤에 앉아 계시는데요. Thank you so much. 그리고 우리 민권센터 우리 김갑송 우리 국장님 오셨습니다. 그리고 최재 회장님 오셨나요? 네, 뉴욕 가정 상담센터 이지혜 소장님 오셨습니다. 많은 분들 오셨는데, 그리고 우리 이경로 회장님 계세요 아직? 떠나신 것 같아요. 예, 그리고 제가 다 소개 못 시켜드려서 죄송합니다. 그리고 I think we're gonna take a pictures because picture is very important. So I think they're gonna give you some guideline. Thank you, Andy. Alright, 감사합니다.
All right, everyone, for the next part of the program, as I mentioned before, I know this is something that all of you have eagerly waiting for. I would like to welcome Sharon Lee. She'll be the moderator. If you don't know Sharon, she's actually the former president of our wonderful Queens. So Sharon, thank you so much for your support and being part of the program. Sharon, it's all yours.
Testing. Good afternoon. All right, I'm going to ask our distinguished panelists to come up and join me here on stage. We are running a little bit behind, and so we're going to ask everyone for your grace because it is an unenviable position to be standing in the way of a crowd of about 150 people and lunch. So we're going to ask you to be patient with us because we've got some extraordinary speakers today, as mentioned, and we are eager to meet with you later on. So, as mentioned, my name is Sharon Lee. I am the former Queensborough president. You heard from some of my former colleagues in government in New York, Ron Kim, Linda Lee, Julie Wan, who just came and spoke wonderfully, all representing parts of the great borough of Queens, which is part of New York City. But I am absolutely delighted to be here today. I was moderating last year, so clearly I didn't mess it up too badly. But I'm really excited about this panel in particular, just because just extraordinary leaders, trailblazers, and really you're going to hear a lot about everyone's stories that dovetail really nicely to what Joseph Jun talked about, the diasporic identity. And that was a really moving presentation on Mr. Jun's part, so we're really grateful that he traveled cross country on a red eye. When we were listening to the people speaking today, what struck me is we throw around this term leadership a lot, pretty casually. And Ron Kim mentioned something about it's not just about the title, it's not about, it's about what you do. And Julie also mentioned that as well. And I've had the privilege of working with a lot of trailblazers in my very short career. And I will tell you, the one thing that really distinguishes leaders is they pull up and they push up. And what I mean by that is, as we rise, we always pull people up with us, and even more importantly, sometimes push people up in front of us and above us. And that's really key to building power within our Korean American community, and especially many of you in this room today. I want to thank the investment of our sponsors for today's forum. The Consul General, welcome and congratulations. We have a new Consul General here in New York. Very excited to meet you. And we had a lot of firsts over the past year. With your coming through, we had elected our first Korean Americans in the New York City Council. And the first is not easy. We've got a stage here full of firsts. And with the first comes a lot of burden, a lot of responsibility, and we'll hear more about that. And also thank you, of course, to the Federation of Korean American Associations of Northeastern Queens, Judy Yu, and her key partners, Jin Twilley and Andrew Sull. This is not easy to put together, and they do an extraordinary job with a lot of grace. And the sponsors here today, part of this is about, we believe that you can't be what you can't see. You can't be what you can't see, whether it's here in Northeastern US or all around the world. And so if we can do it, you know that you can do it, and you can probably do it much better than we can. So with that, before I introduce our panelists, I want to take a quick survey around the room, because we've got a lot of young people here and so excited. Show of hands, rising 6th grade and 7th graders. Show of hands. 6th and 7th graders. All right, keep your hands up. Rising 8th graders, raise your hands. All right. Rising 9th graders. Okay. 10 and 11. All the way up. Let's see those hands. Okay. And rising seniors. Rising seniors. Anyone in college? Okay. And one last quick survey. If you were born here in the States, raise your hand. Okay. And if you were born outside of the States, raise your hand. All right, we've got a very strong sample here. Again, delighted. All right, so we're going to dive right into the feature of today, our distinguished panelists here. We'll first start with Nancy Han. Nancy Han is an award-winning news executive and journalist. CNN, CBS, ABC, I mean the alphabet soup of network television, right? And also Now This Media. You may have heard of that, come up on your social media feeds. And you know, what's remarkable about Nancy is that throughout her distinguished career, and she's nowhere near done, by the way, throughout her career, Nancy has been the only Asian American newsroom executive. The only, not even just the only Asian American woman, the only Asian American. And the only Asian American in major newsrooms. And what that means, the reason why that's so important is because newsrooms is where those big decisions get made. Decisions about what matters. What matters? What is newsworthy? The clips that Joseph showed us, what's gonna be shown on TV, what is newsworthy, what is worth valuable and precious airtime. Those are the decisions that Nancy was part of and building and part of creating that psyche and our story, the telling of our story. And what's remarkable also for those who may relate is that she is an immigrant. She was born in Seoul. She was made in Korea. And she rose to the highest ranks of journalism here in the United States of America. So more about her very unlikely, but of course, inspiring path. Second, we have Dr. David Park, physician scientist. David, you know, it's always good to have a doctor in the house, so we'll make a note of that. Any problems, we got a doctor in the house. And, you know, out of everybody here on stage, I will say, he's probably the dream that our parents always wanted us to be, right? If we took a poll of the parents in the room and say, who was the most successful here on stage? Hands down, it might be David Park.
Make your mommies proud.
Yeah, make a lot of mamas proud. But he is currently a director at Bellevue Hospital in New York. It's a Trauma 1 center, right? And he also teaches at NYU School of Medicine. So very good person to know. But the other remarkable thing about David is that throughout his career, and also growing up here in New Jersey, we're going to hear more from him about his story is one that may feel very familiar to many of you. Joseph talked about this also a little bit, that sense of otherness, the perpetual foreigner syndrome, being the only Asian American kid in a community of non-Asians, and what that means, and the challenges, but also the opportunities that come with that. So that's David Park. And last, but certainly not least, Kyung Yoon. She is a trailblazer in the philanthropic community in New York City, which is like the capital of philanthropy in the US. Many of you may have heard of the Korean American Community Foundation, preeminent philanthropic organization. And what makes them remarkable is that their commitment to intergenerational change, in particular addressing the poverty and the struggles that are very real in the Asian American community, despite all the model minority stereotypes. Poverty and struggle is very real, especially among our elders, right? And so, and in particular in the past 3 years with the rise in anti-Asian hate, the Korean American Community Foundation has done extraordinary work of investing in work to combat that and also to uplift our communities. And of course, as with any trailblazer, many, many chapters in her life, previously with the World Bank Institute, as well as with Fox 5 in New York, where she was the very first, a lot of firsts on the stage, first Korean American broadcast reporter in New York City. She was like our Connie Chung. And if you don't know who Connie Chung is, you gotta sit down. But that is Kyung Yoon. And so with that introduction, I'm tired of hearing my voice too, so we're gonna hear from our panelists. And at the end of this forum, we're gonna open it up to Q&A. So folks, if you have questions, I'm gonna ask that you write it on a piece of paper and hand it to Jin or Andrew, and we'll try to address as many of those questions as possible. First question, Korean American. It comes with the good and the bad. So, there's this thing called rose, thorn, bud. Rose is a highlight, a positive about being Korean American. Thorn is maybe a challenge or something that needs more support. And then also a bud, something that you're looking forward to, whether it's as a Korean American or our emerging Korean American leaders, next generation. And we can go in any order that you would like.
Should I start?
Sure.
So good afternoon. Thank you so much for that intro, and thank you. There's so much work I know that goes into organizing something like this, and I was also born in Korea. I came to America at the age of 6, and I sure wish that I could have attended something like this when I was growing up, because it's so important to feel a part of something as large and also as invested in your future and your success, and that is your community, and you're a part of it, and I think this is just extraordinary. I have to say, for me, that would be the thorn. When I came to America, there wasn't this kind of organization, and I was very ashamed of being Korean. At the time, when I was your age, Korea was still a very poor country. And so I think at every way that I looked, I was in this place of feeling very grateful to be in America and very ashamed of my own country, where I came from. And also that I just felt in the margins of America, felt very invisible, felt this country was not for me, that wasn't, that I was just erased. Like there was nobody. When I turned on the TV, I didn't see anybody who looked like me. I didn't see documentaries like what Joseph was making. I didn't see, like Minari, being nominated for Oscars. So it's a very different time, and I'm saying that I just feel the ecosystem has changed a lot. I would say the rose for me of being Korean American came at a time when I started to, I actually went to the Metropolitan Museum once, and I didn't even live in New York. I had just come here to visit, and I saw this amazing exhibit that said 5,000 years of Korean art. And I was like, 5,000 years? And at the time, I was really thinking like, oh my goodness, America is like barely 200 years old. And it's 5,000 years, and I saw these tigers and landscapes, and it was like amazing art. And I thought, this is my heritage. This is my history. And I felt so proud of where I was coming from. And it was sort of the first inkling. And for me, that was a big rose of feeling so much pride for the first time of being Korean and drawing on that as my heritage. And I think my hope for the future is that, we are living in this time. Korea is evolving, America is evolving, and we also, as Korean Americans, we are growing and we're evolving in wonderful, exciting ways, and I'm really excited and hopeful for our future.
I think the rose part comes from actually the American part of being Korean American. When I think about how I grew up, we were one of 3 Asian families in Massachusetts, and everybody assumed that we were Chinese, I'm sorry. So imagine being a foreigner in a new country and yet still misidentified, and what that does to your own sense of pride. So that is sort of what fueled my interest in journalism, because in the news, I saw how my own family perceived other races, and that was because of what you saw on television. And the power of those images is what struck me as, what if a Korean person were responsible for telling those stories? How would perceptions of Koreans change? Because again, I think we grew up in the same era. The only news about Koreans at the time were about student demonstrations and about uprisings, and there was nothing positive. There was no Korean faces or stories being told from an American point of view in a positive light. You didn't see stories of success. You only saw turmoil. And with that, I assumed that these are the reasons why there's so much racism against people who look like me. So that is what, and also other races as well, how black people were portrayed on television, how Hispanics were. Virtually no one other than white people were put in a positive light. And so you can't be what you can't see. I think we have a same story. Connie Chung was the only Asian face in news. So when I was a teenager, I looked at her and I thought, I want to be the Korean version of that. But naively, I thought that the power to tell stories came from the person who was speaking them on screen. I had no idea about the army of people who work behind the scenes. And it was really only until I started working in a major newsroom that I saw that the power came from the people who were in the newsroom making decisions. And so that put me on a totally different path. But the rose is that only in America would I have been able to rise to the level that I did at such a young age. I think about this all the time. If I had stayed, like, what would have happened if my family stayed in Korea? Would I even have a career? Chances are I probably wouldn't. I would probably be at home taking care of the family. Because of the year in which I was born and just what society was like. It's because I'm a Korean American that I was able to break boundaries and do things at an age where, had you supplanted me and put me someplace else, that wouldn't have been possible. It wouldn't have been possible for me to be 24 years old working in the #1 newsroom in America. It only could happen here. So I would say that's the rose. The thorn is the constant reminder that you still are different and that you still have to work a little bit harder and better than everybody else to prove yourself. And I don't know that that feeling will ever change. And then the bud for me is just, and that's one thing that I would like to impart on everyone, just you have to not ever stop learning. I chose a field that is very technical. It's sort of technology driven, innovation driven. But if I just sit in the same job and spin my wheels for decades and learn nothing else, to me that's not a fulfilling career. The world is changing so fast. There was no internet when I was younger. And that has completely changed the entire world. But what's the next iteration, and how am I a student of that, and how is that going to help me in my career and in being a part of the community? There are so many exciting new things that are happening that that's what excites me the most, and how I can participate in that and become a continuing contributor to the community through new innovation and new technologies.
Thank you. That was great. I actually, since I'm not in media and news, I mean, I just take it for granted that, what we see on TV is what's representative, but clearly there's a large undercurrent of control on what we see and what we believe. So it's great to see you guys involved in that and shaping that. As Sharon had mentioned, I'm sort of the poster boy for making my mommy proud. But I would say that as a Korean American, one of the big thorns, and I'm sure a lot of the kids here in this room feel, is that I would say the hardest thing was that I was almost a foreigner in my own house, right? That your parents come over, they speak Korean, you speak English, and there's no dialogue. There's no communication. I don't think I've ever had a meaningful conversation with my dad apart from eat, sleep, study, you know, and we didn't even really eat that often together because they worked so hard at their store that my sister raised us. She made dinner for us. We were latchkey kids, which means that, you know, our parents weren't home very much during the times that we were, you know, awake and had dinner. So my sister made great sacrifices for us to really cook and prepare, and she actually was the one that made sure that we did our homework. So a lot of, you know, gratefulness to my oldest sister. But yeah, I think it's really hard not being able to talk to your mom and dad. And, you know, we do that now, you know, like I take that for granted. You know, my kids, we speak at dinner and we talk about what we did during the day and what they learned. And, you know, and I think that's something that, you know, is tough when you have a very different relationship with your parents that you can't just share in dialogue. And I think, you know, and if you have a parent that speaks Korean, please learn to speak Korean. And if you have a parent who speaks only Korean, please learn to speak a little English, and then let's have some more conversations at the dinner table. I think that would make a huge difference. So I think being, you know, that was probably also what shaped how we felt at school, which is that since I didn't feel really Korean, you know, you had this sort of hard, you know, desire to be more American, whatever that was back in the 1970s and 80s, which was just being as non-Korean as possible, right? And so no kimchi. I didn't want anything to do with kimchi. I didn't want anything to do with, like, you know, jjigae. You know, I didn't want to eat Korean food, and you just wanted to identify with being not Korean. And I think that was a really painful part of growing up, which was that your parents are so Korean and you didn't want to be like them, which is it's terrible, right? And, you know, and now that I'm older and, you know, you think if your kids didn't want to be like you, that would be pretty terrible, right? That would suck. So, you know, now that I'm older and I see you know, I love kimchi, I love jjigae, I love, you know, Korean culture, you know, and as I'll get to it a little bit with the rose parts, you know, now that I've actually been back to Korea to give talks and to, you know, as part of my career, it was really amazing to be so embraced by the Korean medical culture, and which I'll kind of touch on more, but it was really humbling to me, and it was probably one of the most proud moments for my dad to know that his son was going to Korea to give talks. And, you know, and then when I went back there, I was overwhelmed, you know, and when I brought my son and my daughter to Korea, it was like, this is the land of your people. You know, I was like, this is pretty heavy stuff. It felt wonderful to be connected to something so old, you know, and our genes are all sort of derived from this one place, and it felt really amazing to be a part of something so old and so rich. Which brings me to, you know, the thorn part, because the rose part, because we were, you know, my parents were in a foreign land. They didn't speak English, so they became very close-knit in the Korean church. And my father was an elder, and, you know, we were raised very strongly in a Christian background, and their leadership was taught to us that in an upside-down Christian philosophy, which is leadership is service. And that you have to serve, you have to wash people's feet, you know, in order to be a good leader. You have to think about how you're going to raise the whole system up if you're going to lead. And how do you lead is you lead best from the rear and pushing everyone forward. And I think that is something that I learned from, you know, being in that community service mentality of Christianity. And I think that influenced how I see the world. And even though I didn't speak with my parents in a very deep way, they always had that mentality when they prayed for us in Korean. We didn't know what they were saying, but we knew that it was about that. And so where I am now and how that shaped me is that, you know, I've been given the opportunity, because I do both medical care, but I also have research focus. So I can serve in multiple ways. One is to serve clinically And then one is to serve by bringing new discovery. And so one allows me to think locally, one allows me to think globally. And the main purpose there is really to make something better and to bring better care. So by leading Bellevue is one of the oldest hospitals, if not the oldest hospital system in the country. It takes care of the most diverse population in Manhattan. One of the main problems that Bellevue had was that it had very limited resources for delivering care for advanced rhythm disorders, which is what I specialize in, cardiac rhythm, in terms of procedures, in terms of understanding genetics and the genetic causes of diseases, and we were able to build all the programs necessary to deliver world-class care for every population. So we have many African American patients, we have many patients from Latin America, we have patients from China, we have patients from Bangladesh, Poland, Korea. We serve the world, and we are able to deliver the highest quality care because we can build those programs. One, because we have administrator that really wants us to build those programs and supports that. But also we have a bunch of people there that really care enough to build the programs. So that leadership role has allowed us to really build those programs up and deliver just care that we're really proud of in a very urban hospital and patients that don't normally see that kind of care. So we're really proud of that. And then the research part is what brought me closer to Korea and also the rest of the world where scientific research is shared. And so we can serve humanity by actually explaining why people develop disease, and we can develop new therapies that can also actually make the medical care that we see today not be the same as what we deliver tomorrow in the future. And so I think being in that sort of dual world growing up as a thorn turned into something that you think about community and service that can then translate into good leadership, whether it's locally or globally. I think being a bit of that outsider will always give you that perspective of what it feels like to be on the outside and to serve those that are on the outside. And I think that is a gift. So it's not a weakness, it's a gift. And something that I also learned when I was in Korea, they said, which is so Korean, that we're all talking about how we can build global networks of medical care together. And while they were eating and we were all sharing together in time, they put out this big chant of fighting, right? And I think that's a wonderful thing, right? The LA riots and how the Koreans banded together to fight, not only with guns, but also with ultimately peaceful demonstration. We're here to fight, not, again, with our fists and with guns, but we're here to fight together to really bring, good service to wherever we are. And I think that's what Koreans do really well. And if it takes a little bit of discomfort growing up, so be it, but be proud of who you are. What Koreans achieve, I'm amazed by, what Korea, the homeland, is doing, we're amazed by, and then what Korean Americans will do and Korean Canadians will do and wherever. We're gonna try to keep building things so you guys can keep building things and serve the community, so thank you.
That's terrific, thank you. I don't have a clock, so I don't know how we are on time, but Jen and Andrew, do we have any questions from the audience? Oh, you do, okay. But before we get to those, I'm gonna ask one last question of our panelists, and then I'll take some of those questions. We'll make it easy. Looking back at your, 12 to 19-year-old self, given all of your experiences in your careers and also personally, what piece of advice or guidance or coaching would you tell yourself, your 12-year-old Kyung, or your 15-year-old Nancy, or your 19-year-old David?
especially when it comes to choosing a career, I would say maybe don't listen to your parents. Maybe that would be the one time not to, and to really think about what you care about deeply as an individual, what topics you're obsessed with, and how you can turn that into a career. The last thing I ever wanted to do was sit behind a desk all day and work a 9-to-5 job, and that's what I got because I ended up working every single horrible shift. So knowing what your own personality, what you bring to the table as a person, what you're good at. Oftentimes your family is looking out for you for your best interest, but they don't know sometimes what you really feel in your heart unless you share it. And it's hard for them to give you actual proper career advice because they're looking through a different lens. And so I know that's probably a very controversial thing to say, but that's what I did. And fortunately, my parents told me to just do whatever I wanted. So they were always supportive. So I hope that you also have that support, but just don't do what somebody else thinks is the best thing for you. Figure out what that is for yourself first.
Yeah, and I would just add that in the figuring out, I think what I would tell myself when I was your age is just to listen, like what gets you up out of bed in the morning, like super excited, wanting to get up and wanting to go dive into something, and maybe it's a sport, maybe it's like, maybe it is your homework, and let's be real, like there's going to be things that you have to do that you're not going to be so passionate about. There's just like a baseline of like getting like a well-rounded education. But honestly, after you get out of school, you don't really have to do math a lot if you don't really want to, that's why we went into journalism, because we like to write. So, I have to still balance my budget or whatever, but beyond, I don't have to do like trigonometry, but you have to do it now, and so do it. But do listen to yourself. What is it that gets you excited? I will just say, also, I have the hindsight of having raised 2 kids. I have 2 boys. They're very different. The first one was very academic. Without me pushing him or anything, he just, was like, he was a pretty good test taker, and he was always very academic. My second son was very creative. He's artistic, and we listened to that as well. I think if I had told him from day one, like, why can't you be more like your brother? Like, that would have just killed what was in him. And he has a lot to express. Like, he had a lot to say. But because, he was able to, so he had this, like, teenage rock band, when he was like and there was he would get gigs, and he would be playing at some of these, like, clubs in New York City very late at night on a weeknight. And he would have a math test the next day. I think we could, as his parents, have said, you can't do that because you have a math test the next day. But we actually said, no, you can do it, because we saw how much he not only wanted to perform, but he was like booking that gig. He was writing a thank you note to the promoter the next day. I think those kinds of skills are much more important in life, in terms of whatever you decide to go in, to be entrepreneurial, to be writing thank you notes, to be like following up. And you're gonna do that because you're passionate and because you care, not because your parents tell you to do it or because you feel burdened about it. And I think those are gonna be keys to your success in whatever you do. And I would highly, highly encourage you to not censor yourself early on, that something's not practical, so I'm not going to develop this. What is it that makes you want to get up out of bed and listen to it and really dig into it?
Thank you for that. Did you want to add something there?
No, I'm just amazed that these are Korean American moms. You guys have to meet my wife. No, but yeah, I echo. I think maybe to take, a slightly different approach, which is yes, pursue your passions, but also set realistic goals, and also have somebody that can either mentor you through You know, if you're heading towards a path that's less traveled, there are more risks, and there's more risk for failure, but give yourself room to explore that risk, but also time enough to realize when it hasn't materialized, so you don't waste too much time. But definitely explore the paths, right? Because when you're young and you don't have kids, that's the time to do it. Because once you have kids, you gotta pay for college, you gotta pay for a lot of things, right? So, you know, but things, you know, but definitely use time that you have to explore, for sure.
We got a lot of questions, and I was just organizing them because there are some that are similarly themed, and I actually have a few here that are directed to specific leaders, including Joseph. So we'll save those for another time. But here's a question that actually has been coming up a little bit. How should we respond to inappropriate racial comments? How can I defend myself without being violent? And how often in terms of adversity did you have to address racial problems or issues? And were you personally affected by the mass hate against Asian Americans during COVID-19? How so? So overall, some of the racial tension and challenge question. Floor is yours.
Just, this is something that I tell my own children. I would say if you ever encounter racism, again, this may be a little controversial, I would never address it silently. If somebody calls you something, you call them out. You have to be able to stand up for yourself. And sometimes it's at work. People may say things that are overtly racist, and you have to call them out on it. If you don't say anything, that is giving people license that that behavior is okay. So it's not okay, and you have to find the bravery to say something. And most people, in the same way that you deal with bullies, the minute you stand up to a bully, they back off. But if you cower and turn away and walk away or think you're being the bigger person, oftentimes it's not as effective as if you just really just put your foot down. This is, and I've sort of always been like this. I remember when I was a kid, maybe, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old in a playground, and there were teenage boys who were making fun of us and calling us Asian slurs. And I spat at them as this little thing, and I thought that was my way of standing up to them, and they laughed. And they probably thought that that was not only funny, but sort of cute that this little girl kind of fought back. And then fast forward to recent times, fortunately nothing directly happened to me during the post-COVID hate, but it absolutely affected my children because they told me not to go on the subway, to, you know, don't do this or that, and they were actually worried about me before I even realized that they were seeing me as an example of the people who were being targeted.
I agree so much with Nancy that you do have to hold people accountable when you are faced with slurs or with racism. I think there's kind of also one thing, sometimes when you're faced with something like that, you can feel very alone. And that is what they're trying to do, to make you feel different and othered, that you don't belong here. And you absolutely belong here. You belong in this country. So for me, I think there is that, but by the way, if somebody calls you something, don't get into like name calling. Try to like not get, get at their level, but do call them out. But I think for me too, when I came over at the age of 6, and like Joseph said, I came from Korea where a name like Yoon Kyung-bok, was like totally normal. But then when I was introducing myself, all children would make fun of it, and there was a lot of bullying, and I cried, but it's something that stayed with me all my life in America, and I actually changed my name. I mean, just informally, I just started calling myself by what I saw as an American name, which is only because Europeans were here, whatever. So I was known as Karen Yoon for many, many years growing up. When I went to college, I decided that I was going to kind of retake my name. I mean, this was a new start, and I called myself by Kyung Yoon. But also some years later, when I had a chance to to make my debut on New York City news television, I remember that I struggled because I was given some advice by very well-meaning colleagues that I should think about picking a more telegenic name, moniker. And I slept on it, and I decided that I was going to be Kyung Yoon. And that was really thinking about my 6-year-old self, how I would have felt when I was bullied about my name. If I turned on the TV and saw somebody who had a name like mine on television, on a newscast, but also more importantly, what those bullies would have felt if they saw somebody with my name on television. And so I feel like there are ways that we can work and respond individually, and we need to. But we can also work in terms of using whatever positions we're in to also hold hands and to raise our voice and our influence together. Because as you know, like you can have somebody with a really beautiful big voice, opera star, but there is so much more power in a chorus when we can all sing together and that we can all get our voices out together. And I feel like that has been the work that I have also been doing with the Korean American Community Foundation about the power of giving each of us individually. It doesn't have to be a lot. You think of words like philanthropy and it sounds like, oh, that's not me. That's gonna be after, I make my first million. But no, it's really about giving together and for a common cause and around our shared sense of Korean American, Asian American identity. And as Sharon said, not just about, what we can get, but about what we can give. And in the process, lifting others up and lifting our entire community up so that we can be that chorus that has a stronger voice and influence, and that ultimately is going to be the biggest response to racism.
I think the responsibility is not completely on your shoulders to have to answer back to every single racial slur. I mean, I think you guys should have a good sense of who you are and be proud of who you are and of your heritage and community. And if somebody doesn't, partly, if you have to pick your battles, right? I mean, if somebody just is so ignorant that they have nothing better to say than a racial slur, or is it really worth your time to get into a battle with that person? I would say probably not the vast majority of times. And, you will prove yourself in so many other ways, in ways that matter to you and your family and to your friends and to the community, right? So you don't have to feel bad because some random person says something that is really inconsequentially in terms of your own worth, who just can't take the time to, be as educated as they should be about other people. What I would say is try to, be integrated to other groups, because this is the United States of America, right? So we're here to be a part of the community. Don't isolate yourself and only have Korean American friends, or you can have majority, but I would just spend time working with other people and expressing your Koreanness to others and having them enjoy and learn about you as well. But I don't think it's your personal responsibility to tackle every slur. It's not worth your time the vast majority of the time. But if there's somebody who clearly is a colleague or somebody above you, you need to say something to that person directly or above them. But if it's just some guy in the street, I just can't have time. I don't have time to deal with that. I'm sorry. It's just not worth my time.
So pick our battles. Okay. And there are degrees to that, right? Sometimes it's really explicit and in your face. And then there are other times what we call microaggressions, where it's very subtle, and sometimes you second guess whether was that was it just me or is that racist? And I think just really listening to your inner voice is very important, and also looking out for others as well, right? Sometimes it's easier to be an advocate for others than it is to be an advocate for ourselves. And so I think we look out for those unfair treatments and unkindness and injustices of others. And we speak up when we have the power to do so, especially for those who may not be able to. And when we all do that, to Kyung's point, we collectively have a louder voice. Again, I don't know where we are in time, but there are some really good questions here. So Jen, Andrew, I'm gonna lean on you to just signal to me when to wrap it up. Here's a question that's also thematic, and it's actually going back to Joseph. His question about, do you think there is going to be an end to Korean culture? And how would you advise young Korean Americans to stay connected to their roots and preserve the Korean diaspora? When did you feel that you also exist as Korean American, not only as Korean? Is there a specific moment that made you feel that you belong in this country? And what are some thoughts or feelings you had as other people became more aware of Korean culture, right? I can't tell you how proud I am of BTS. I don't listen to them, I don't follow them.
Oh yeah,
Man,
you do.
they put us on the map, right? They put us on the map. So culture, diaspora, all of those questions. And don't feel compelled to answer, only if you would like to take the mic.
I mean, Korea still exists, right? I mean, like Korea is there, and it's a very strong anchoring force. It'll keep evolving. It's just turning into an economic and industrial powerhouse. So it does create this sense of anchoring pride to every Korean that's not in Korea. I think it just changed when we were kids, there was really no big Korean thing. Like there was Gold Star, maybe, but apart from that, there was really nothing coming out of Korea that we could say. But now it's like media, entertainment, cars, TVs, like what isn't Korean at this point? And it just kind of, as young people, right, young Korean Americans, I mean, they must look at Korea going like, what is up with those guys? I mean, we're not being active enough, as Korean Americans, but it is inspiring. But I just don't think Korean American, I think if you're gonna live outside of Korea, you have to expect to have some fusion with the culture around you. So you will continue to change and evolve, and the ethnic melding will happen. Children will look less Korean ethnically, but they're still Korean identified, and I think that's a lovely thing, and I think people should just expect Koreanness to be very, very, fluid, and it becomes something else, but still there's some Koreanness in there that's special, but it becomes even its own special thing when it starts to fuse and take on a life of its own. And why not let it go as far as it wants to go? I don't know. Who's said to say to hold it back? Let it evolve and become something totally special and new, right? I mean, it'll make it stronger.
I would just say that, I was so moved by the shots that Joseph showed from his movie, from his film Geronimo at the end of, the Koreans in Argentina or the Koreans in Cuba, the Koreans, but they were really Korean, but they're not like Koreans in Korea, just like we're not like Koreans in Korea. So we're very proud of Korea and how it's doing in the world. But I do think that being Korean American is another identity, and it's something that is legitimate. Because sometimes, and I think we've all felt it, I also, when I go to Korea, yeah, I kind of look like everybody else, but I feel a little different. My Korean's not that, I speak it, but I'm not totally fluent. Also, sometimes when you're in America, again, you can be made to feel that you don't totally belong here. But I'm here to say that you, as Korean Americans, that in and of itself, that is an identity. And that is an identity that belongs to larger Korean diaspora around the world. And we are all going to be a little different because we're all products of our environment. But maybe that thread that binds through each of us, whether you speak Korean or not, whether whether your parents speak English or not, or whatever things that we can all be different. And we have identities, right? I'm also a mom, and I'm also a philanthropy executive, but I'm Korean. And that is something that threads every single one of us around this room. And I think we can pull that string together and do something that unites us. And for me, that is when we talk about our senior citizens. Do you know that 1 in 4 Korean Americans in New York lives below the poverty line? And that is shameful. And yet that is, that's erased by this model minority stereotype that all Asians are doing so well. So as a result, government funding, foundation grants do not reach senior citizens in our community. There's Myung-Mi Kim here, who's the president and CEO of the KCS, doing wonderful work to help our Korean seniors. Those organizations need our support. And that is what our foundation does. And we do that because so many people give, and then so that we can provide these sustainable grants and to strengthen our organizations. I think there's so much work to be done, but there is so much joy for me in that kind of shared commitment and shared celebration, and also shared sacrifice of what it means for this generation, certainly for the previous generation that sacrificed for us, but for all the generations to come. And so I really feel that you are a part of something that is so exciting and important to dignify our identity as Korean Americans and as a part of a larger diaspora. Okay.
All right, Jen and Andrew are giving me looks. I'm gonna squeeze in one last quick question, and I'll take the hit. As you answer this question, I'd also like to ask you, how do we keep in touch with you? And as I mentioned to some of you earlier, during lunch, please don't hesitate to come up, make connections, exchange cards, find out what each other's handles are, because we are here for you. We are investing in you. We want to be here for you and your trajectory. So the last quick question, and these are thematic. How many people believed in you for your dream career? Namely, who helped or inspired you to get to where you are today? Who helped or inspired you to get you to where you are today? Because no one does it alone. And with that, final answers and how to contact you, and then we'll close out for lunch.
For me, it was 100% my parents. As soon as I stated it, they stood behind it, and they gave me the sort of like safety net feeling of, if this doesn't go well and if I fail, there will be no, what do you call it? Like, nothing bad will happen. It will still be okay, and it's okay for me to pursue this. And they are my biggest champions. They always have been. So 100%, that's been the backbone of where I drive my ambition and sense of constantly wanting to do more. Oh, and then in terms of getting in touch, I have my email on LinkedIn, and I'm at every social media platform.
I can say it was not my parents because I had a very, I think Julie Wan talked about it, you know, being at IBM and kind of leaving a secure job. I had a very good job at the World Bank, and to leave that to pursue this dream of being Connie Chung was not something that was embraced by my parents, to say the least. But I will say that it was my parents who gave me such a strong foundation of sacrificing so that I could get an education. They always believed in me and gave me that confidence to be able to make that, that leap. I think just for me, why I so believe in building up organization and infrastructure in our community, our families and friends are important, but for me, like the biggest support in my early days as a journalist and being the only Asian American in my newsroom was the Asian American Journalists Association, AAJA. And that was a place where I went where I could meet other journalists who were in different positions and in different levels of seniority. We weren't that senior in those days, but we were building power. And so today, AAJA, along with many other organizations, KACF is one of them, we are in the business of building power. So I really would urge you, in whatever you decide to go into, that you are also connected with the industry, and particularly with Asian American affinity groups. But for women, like there's women's groups, there's many other ways that you can be connecting and finding mentors and finding people who will take an interest in you. Because also, we cannot emphasize enough, like my panelists on this, you know, on the stage, I mean, they are leaders and representation matters. Maybe some of you, because you see Nancy Han today, you will think, I can be a newsroom executive, or I can be, you know, a doctor, but who also is doing research and service. And so we want you to open up your worldview of what you can be. But I do think the most powerful thing is to be seeing somebody who looks like you. I mean, we saw so many political leaders and community leaders in this room. And you're gonna be seeing more and more, and hope that you will be a part of that, you know, of that trend.
Yeah, so I would say that probably my parents didn't know how to help me, but they always were instilling this belief that I could do whatever I wanted to do. And I think that's enough. And if you know what you want to do in life, and then you can really hone in on what you want to do, and you have a belief system behind you that says you can achieve it, then you will, as long as you do it in a way that, again, is, you know, that you pursue something that is not only worth pursuing, makes you happy, but also is achievable. Make sure that, you know, you have some mentorship in your life that can help sort of direct your path in case you're sort of winding into a ditch. You don't want to be in a ditch. So, so I think it's important to have people help you and shepherd you, like this group of people up here. I can be reached by email, which I guess I'll share, or you know, I'm on Twitter. My lab is on Twitter. I don't have a personal Twitter account, but and I don't use it very much. So I don't know how to. Can people reach me on Twitter? Okay, so you know, it's
all direct messaging.
So it's at David Park Lab 1, but you know, if you guys want to reach me, I'll look on that direct message.
At David Park, the number 1.
Lab 1, yeah,
Lab
the number 1.
1, the number
Right.
1. Okay,
Yeah.
very
But
good.
We can email that out.
Thank you. Can we give a round of applause to our leaders here, our trailblazers? And I'll take a moment of personal privilege. It's been my honor to help moderate this year's forum. And I'll actually answer that last question myself. There are so many people that I would have to name, and y'all are already eating, so I'll spare you of that. But I will say, in terms of who helped or inspired me to get to where I am today, so many people, but at the end of the day, one thing I learned in politics is never forget the ones who brought you to the dance. Never forget the ones who brought you to the dance. And with that, thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch, and we'll talk further. Thank you.